In this video, you'll discover the step-by-step processes to creating an underpainting that will leave you in awe. I will guide you through the whole process and unveil the foundations for achieving remarkable artwork. Let's dive in. Okay, so we are beginning this underpainting in the usual way, starting with some lean painting medium. I'm using the Zesty lean medium, but you would be able to use a 50-50 split of linseed oil, walnut oil, and some thinners, something along those lines. I will put some information in your notes so that you can use alternatives to the Zesty if you like. And the paint I'm using today is the burnt umber. Now I like to start with a puddle of my medium. We do need a thin medium for the underpainting. This is a lean medium, which means we are following the fat over lean rule. I'll add the paint to the medium. I'm staying out of that paint puddle. And then I'll use that sponge to dip into that thin down puddle, and I will use that to apply all over the canvas. I always like to dispense in the corners of the canvas first before going over the actual drawing lines. Now remember, we have used a fixative, or you've gone over your lines with some acrylic paint. You want to make sure that your lines are sealed before adding this oil layer on top. So we're aiming to cover this entire canvas with this middle tone value, and from that we will be erasing our lights and adding on our darks with more paint. As you can see here, I'm adding some more medium. I'm creating some more of that mixture to cover the canvas. Just as a small side note, I've actually gessoed these canvases ahead of time, several weeks ahead of time actually. So this canvas has got a couple of layers of gesso on there, which makes for a smoother painting, but it does mean you have to work a little bit harder pushing that medium into the weave of the canvas when there is gesso on there. Now I will be speeding the footage up from time to time during this process because some of the processes are very repetitive, but I will be doing a talk over and explaining each time as I work through this process exactly what I'm doing. So here what I'm doing is continuing to cover the entire canvas with that middle tone value. Once I've got everything covered, I'm using the other side of the sponge to really smooth the surface, and as you can see, I can still clearly see my drawing lines. I then like to remove my medium and any wet paint off the palette. Now you've got medium on the canvas, you do not need to add any more. So I'm going to begin by working around the flowers and getting a little bit of a darker tone in that background. It is a little bit darker behind all those flowers, and getting that darker tone behind there with a little bit of this burnt umber, and I'm still applying that paint quite thinly and just putting an extra layer on. As you can see, I pick up the paint and then kind of pat most of that off on the palette, so I'm always controlling the amount of paint that is going onto the palette. And I've switched now to the Dome blender, or you can use a smoosher brush from Rosemary's, and I do have a recommended product list on the website. If you look on the header bar, you'll see that there, but you want something that's nice and soft that I can almost use as though I was sketching with a pencil, and I'm going to begin adding some darker tones to that background. Once I've got that colour on there, I'll switch to a mop and I will soften all of that off as well. So again, you'd be adding the paint on and softening, and then also erasing with a few different tools. So I'm speeding the footage up for you now. This painting, or this underpainting, took an hour and a half to complete, and of course I'm going to condense that down to this tutorial. But as you can see now, I'm staying with that lovely soft dome blender and constantly mopping as well. So you'll see me just gradually add in those darker tones. Now here I'm using a paper towel to erase. So some of those lighter tones now I'm using a paper towel to get a nice soft erase. So the tools you'll use, if you're using a paper towel, you will erase something soft. If you're using a eraser, typist eraser, the marks will be a little bit harder. So it all depends what kind of look you're going for. My advice would to be always stay quite soft in the beginning. So now I'm using a flat brush and I'm starting to detail some of the stems in that background. Just adding a slightly darker amount. And here I have switched now to a typist eraser as I start to erase these little buds. Now this really doesn't have to be perfect. Again, an underpainting is just a guide. I'm getting some of those basic details on there. But when it comes to doing the colour layers, if I want to add more, then I can definitely do that. So I'm giving myself a bit of a guide there. Now you've just seen me use a sanding block and I use that to clean that typist eraser and keep it nice and clean. So I'm constantly sharpening this eraser and I'm also using sandpaper to keep it clean as well. And you'll also see me going over with a paper towel and just flicking over, and that's getting rid of any eraser dust. So now I'm going to start adding the details for some of these flowers, and again you will see me add a dark and then a light. So you're always looking, even with these shapes, you don't want to put them all in one tone. You'll notice shadows at the bottom of these buds and then some highlights, and that's what I'm trying to create, is by jumping back and forth, adding some shadow and then also then going back and erasing those highlights. You really want to just be paying attention to lights and darks at this stage without worrying too much about detailing. And again, you'll constantly see me using that mop to keep everything nice and soft. Well, I'm going to be quiet now for a little while. I will jump on if I see there's anything that I really need to point out to you guys. But really now all you're going to be seeing is me jump back and forth between adding paint on and erasing it with different tools. Here you can see I'm starting to add some of those darker little leaves in there, and some of this is coming away slightly from the drawing and just being a little bit free. I can see there's some leaves and things in there, but are they exactly like what's on that drawing? They're not, so I'm not going to worry too much about those. There are some cluster flowers in front of these leaves, but it is important that you get your leaves in first, and then you're able to go over the front like I'm doing now and just rubbing out some of that lighter area for these little cluster flowers. I think this is like baby's breath, and you just want some light shapes in there to represent that those flowers. Moving on to the vase, I am focusing on highlights and shadows before I worry about adding the detailing to that vase. So you can see here I'm erasing with that typist eraser, keeping it nice and sharp so that I can get some nice fine details. And then I want to get the shadows underneath, and this really helps form that roundness of the vase. So again, focus on we've already got the mid-tone in, and then you want to look for a darker tone and for those highlight tones before you start adding any of those pattern details to the vase. So I'm working on the pattern now, and again just paying attention. Even on the pattern, some of the areas are lighter and some of the areas are darker. So I'm just using a finer brush, something small. This is just a small round brush, as I go over those details. So here is a perfect example. I needed to get that dark leaf in first before I was able then to go over the top and get some of those lighter flowers that are actually sitting on the top. And again, if you look at that reference, you'll be able to see exactly what I mean with that. Is that I'm adding those little snowdrops over the top of those darker leaves. Moving on to the flower stand now, I'm starting to get those darks and light tones in there. And again, what you're seeing me do here, in order to show that slightly lighter edge right at the bottom of that table, there is a little reflective light there, but I've got to paint the background a little bit darker so that I'm able to show that slightly lighter reflected edge. As you can see, I'm wiping it out there with a Q-tip. And then working on the other side in the same way, only that one is a darker edge against a slightly lighter area. And if you look at the reference, you do see these on that reference photo. I'm adding some shadows in here, and I'm also adding a few lines to represent that wood grain effect. I'm using an eraser here again just to encourage that wood grain effect and add those extra details. Working on the main sunflower now, I'm starting to add that stronger, darker area. And again, you need to pay attention. There's a little bit of shadow inside the bowl of that flower and also just around the outer edge. We're actually seeing this flower face on, so really pay attention to those little light and darker areas within that shape. It's easier sometimes to add on and then erase off. As I come to the end of the underpainting, I'm sort of standing back now and seeing where I can amp up the contrast. So what you're looking for now is, can you add a little bit more lights and a little bit more darks so that you can get a better contrast on your composition. And I want to make sure that I've got an overall balance to the composition as well. I'll finish with a quick wipe over with the mop and also a quick dusting over with the paper towel to remove any eraser dust. Now you do need to let this thoroughly dry before you begin adding any colour layers to this underpainting. And I shall be painting this live in September 2023 over the course of 3 weekly workshops. So if you are interested in joining me live, I'll leave a link to MazArt Academy in the description box below. I really do hope you've enjoyed exploring the creation of this stunning floral underpainting using oils. And if you found this video insightful and helpful, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Once again, thanks for watching, keep creating, and I'll see you again in the next video.